3. God versus Moloch. Calvin, in his excellent classification of the law in his commentaries on the 4 last books of Moses arranged in the form of a harmony, cites Deuteronomy 18, 9-22, 13, 1-4, Leviticus 18, 21, 19, 26, and 31, and Deuteronomy 12, 29, 32 as basic to the first commandment. These passages relate to man's attempt to know and control the future. Since God is the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth, and the determiner of all things, any attempt to know and control the future outside of God is to set up another God in contempt of the Lord. Every form of illicit probing of the future is cited by Moses. When thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, thou shalt not learn to do after the abominations of those nations. There shall not be found among you any one that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or that useth divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer. For all that do these things are an abomination unto the Lord. And because of these abominations, the Lord thy God doth drive them out from before thee. Thou shalt be perfect, or upright, with the Lord thy God. For these nations which thou shalt possess hearkened unto observers of times, and unto diviners. But as for thee, the Lord thy God hath not suffered thee so to do. Deuteronomy 18, 9-14. And thou shalt not let any of thy seed pass through the fire to Molech, neither shalt thou profane the name of thy God. I am the Lord. Leviticus 18:21. Ye shall not eat anything with the blood, neither shall ye use enchantment, nor observe times. Leviticus 19:26. Regard not them that have familiar spirits, neither seek after wizards, to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. Leviticus 19:31. When the Lord thy God shall cut off the nations from before thee, whither thou goest to possess them, and thou succeedest them, and dwelleth in their land, take heed to thyself that thou be not snared by following them, after that they be destroyed from before thee. And that thou inquire not after their gods, saying, How did these nations serve their gods? Even so will I do likewise. Thou shalt not do so unto the Lord thy God. For every abomination to the Lord which he hateth have they done unto their gods. For even their sons and their daughters they have burnt in the fire to their gods. What things soever I command you, observe to do it. Thou shalt not add thereto, nor diminish from it. Deuteronomy 12, 29-32. Calvin's comment on Deuteronomy 18, 9-14 gets to the heart of the matter. Quote, Moses explains clearly in this passage what it is to have other gods, namely, to mix up the worship of God with things profane, since its purity is only thus maintained by banishing from it all uncongenial superstitions. The sum, therefore, is that the people of God should abstain from all the inventions of men, whereby pure and simple religion is adulterated. End quote. Equally to the point is the observation of another commentator. Quote, Moses groups together all the words which the language contained for the different modes of exploring the future and discovering the will of God, for the purpose of forbidding every description of soothsaying, and places the prohibition of Moloch worship at the head, to show the inward connection between soothsaying and idolatry, possibly because februration, or passing children through the fire in the worship of Moloch, was more intimately connected with soothsaying and magic than any other description of idolatry. End quote. A wide variety of practices is cited. An enchanter is a whisperer or snake charmer. A witch, one who uses charms or spells. A wizard, one who claimed to know the secrets of the other world. A necromancer, one who inquires of the dead, and so on. But the key evil is Moloch worship. The word Moloch, or Melech, Malik, meaning king, is a misvocalization of the name of a pagan, the consonants of king being retained and the vowels of shame used. Human sacrifice was made to this god, who is identified as the god of Ammon in 1 Kings 11:7 and 33. There are references to Moloch in Jeremiah 49:1 and 3, Amos 1:15, Zephaniah 1:5, Leviticus 18:21 and 22 through 5, 2 Kings 23:10, Jeremiah 32:35, etc. And the location of Moloch worship in Israel was the Valley of Hinnom, Jeremiah 32:35, and 2 Kings 23:10. Moloch worship was not limited to Ammon. Moloch is, quote-unquote, the king, or kingship. The name of Moloch is also given as Milcom, 1 Kings 11:5 and 33, and Malcolm, Jeremiah 49:1 and 3, Revised Standard Version, Zephaniah 1:5. Moloch was an aspect of Baal, Jeremiah 32:35. Baal meaning Lord. Under the name of Melkarth, king of Tyre, Baal was worshipped with human sacrifices at Tyre. While relatively little is known of Moloch, much more is known of the concept of divine kingship, the king as God and the God as king, as the divine human link between heaven and earth. The God-king represented man on a higher scale. Man ascended, and the worship of such a god, that is, of such a Baal, was the assertion of the continuity of heaven and earth. It was the belief that all being was one being, and the god therefore was an ascended man on that scale of being. The power manifested in the political order was thus a manifestation or apprehension and seizure of divine power. It represented the triumph of a man and of his people. Moloch worship was thus a political religion. Since Moloch represented kingship and power, sacrifices to Moloch represented the purchase, at the very least, of immunity or insurance and protection, and at its highest claim, of power. The quote-unquote higher sacrifices in paganism, and especially Baal worship, were sacrifices of humanity, that is, self-mutilations, notably castration, the sacrifice of children or of posterity, and the like. The priest became identified with the god to the degree that he quote-unquote departed from humanity by his castration, his separation from normal human relationships, and his abnormalities. The king became identified with the god to the degree that he manifested absolute power. The sacrifice of children was the supreme sacrifice to Moloch. Moloch worship entered Israel when Solomon built an altar for Moloch for his foreign wives, the Ammonites in particular. Apparently, Solomon limited the sacrificial scope of that altar because many generations passed before the first human sacrifice. But Solomon's act, 1 Kings 11:7-8, had introduced the cult into Israel. Moloch worship was thus state worship. The state was the true and ultimate order, and religion was a department of state. The state claimed total jurisdiction over man. It was therefore entitled to total sacrifice. T. Robert Ingram, in his excellent study of law, virtually the only work of merit on the law in generations, rightly links the first commandment to the proscription of statism and totalitarianism. Speaking of, quote, the government which would arrogate to itself all power and bow before no other, end quote, Ingram comments, the modern word for such a government is totalitarian, a government that arrogates to itself total power. The crowning goal of Satan is to have a totalitarian world government. We who have known something of God the Creator know that total power can reside only in Him. Clearly, the maker of anything is greater than anything he might make. The very possibility of a Frankenstein monster, the creation of human hands that can destroy humans and not be destroyed by them, is a false image of distorted reason. It presupposes a supernatural evil genius which deceives men into thinking they have made something, while really they have been but passive agents of an unknown power. The potter can do what he will with his clay. It is certain that the ultimate in supremacy, the greatest power there is is the power to give existence to everything that is. God alone owes his own being to no other, and has eternal existence in himself. The mere possibility of total power residing anywhere forces us to recognize it in the Creator. Total power can be seated nowhere else. Any person who refuses to acknowledge that all things were made, and hence there is a Maker, simply rules out any consideration of the fact that total power exists anywhere. Thus, we may say that for both Christians and non-Christians, there is no reasonable way to establish total power anywhere but in the Creator of all things. Apart from him, all power is divided and thereby limited." End quote. For a state to claim total jurisdiction, as the modern state does, is to claim to be as God, to be the total governor of man and the world. Instead of limited law and limited jurisdiction, the modern anti-Christian state claims jurisdiction from cradle to grave, from womb to tomb, over welfare, education, worship, the family, business and farming, capital and labor, and all things else. The modern state is a Moloch, demanding Moloch worship. It claims total jurisdiction over man and hence requires total sacrifice. But as Ingram observes with respect to worship, quote, "Only the power who is to be worshipped can ordain the manner in which he is to be worshipped." End quote. Similarly, only the power who is ultimate has the right to be the source of law. God is the only true source of law. The state is an agency of law, one agency among many, church, school, family, etc., and has a specified and limited area of law to administer under God. The Moloch state denies any such boundaries. It insists on taxing at will, expropriating at its pleasure by eminent domain, and it claims the right to force the youth into warfare and death at the pleasure of the state. The Moloch state is the product of apostasy. When a people reject God as their king and make a man or the state their king, 1 Samuel 8, 7-9, God declares the consequences. "This will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons, and appoint them unto him for his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and they shall run before his chariots. And he will appoint them unto him for captains of thousands and captains of 50s, and to plow his ground, and to reap his harvest, and to make his instruments of war, and the instruments of his chariots. And he will take your daughters to be perfumers, and to be cooks, and to be bakers. And he will take your fields, and your vineyards, and your olive yards, even to the best of them, and give them to his servants. And he will take the tenth of your seed and of your vineyards, and give to his officers and to his servants. And he will take your menservants and your maidservants, and your goodliest young men and your asses, and put them to his work. He will take the tenth of your flocks, and ye shall be his servants. And ye shall cry out in that day, because of your king, whom ye shall have chosen you. And the Lord will not answer you in that day." 1 Samuel 8, 11-18, Majority Text Version. Several aspects of the state which rejects God are here cited. First, an anti-biblical military conscription will be instituted and enforced. Second, there will be compulsory labor battalions conscripted for state service. Third, the conscription will be of young men and young women, and of animals as well. Fourth, the state will expropriate property, both landed property and livestock. Fifth, because the state is now playing God-king, it will demand, like God, a tithe, a tenth of man's increase as its tax. Sixth, God will not hear a people who are complaining at paying the price for their sins. All these conditions are met and surpassed by the modern Moloch state, which refuses to be content with a tithe, but demands a tax equal to several tithes. In some countries, the local tax required is an incredible seizure. Thus, quote, the late Luigi Einaudi, Italy's foremost economist and ex-president of the Republic, calculated that if every tax on the statute books was fully collected, the state would absorb 110% of the national income." End quote. The Moloch state simply represents the supreme effort of man to command the future, to predestine the world, and to be as God. Lesser efforts, divination, spirit questing, magic, and witchcraft, are equally anathema to God. All represent efforts to have the future on other than God's terms, to have a future apart from, and in defiance of, God. They are assertions that the world is not of God, but of brute factuality, and that man can somehow master the world and the future by going directly to the raw materials thereof. Thus, King Saul outwardly conformed to God's law by abolishing all black arts, but when faced with a crisis, he turned to the witch of Endor, 1 Samuel 28. Saul knew where he stood with God, in rebellion and unrepentant. Saul knew, moreover, the judgment of the law and of the prophet Samuel concerning him, 1 Samuel 15, 10-35. Samuel, alive, had declared God's future to Saul. In going to the witch of Endor, Saul attempted to reach Samuel dead in the faith and hope that Samuel dead was now in touch with and informed concerning a world of brute factuality outside of God, which could offer Saul a God-free, law-free future. But the word from the grave only underscored God's law word, 1 Samuel 28, 15-19. It was the word of judgment. Astrology is to be included in the ungodly probings which cannot put off or charm away judgment. Isaiah 47, 10-14. In Leviticus 19:26, divination and soothsaying are forbidden in the same sentence as the eating of blood. Davis's definition of the meaning of blood in the Bible deserves quotation in full as a succinct statement of the matter. Quote, "Blood, the vital fluid circulating through the body and conveyed by a system of deep-seated arteries from the heart to the extremities, and by a system of superficial veins back again to the heart. The life is in the blood," Leviticus 17:11-14. Or, the blood is the life, Deuteronomy 12:23, though not exclusively, Psalm 104, verse 30. The blood represented the life, and so sacred is life before God that the blood of murdered Abel could be described as crying to God from the ground for vengeance, Genesis 4:10. And immediately after the flood, the eating of the blood of the lower animals was forbidden, although their slaughter for food was authorized, chapter 9, verses 3 and 4, Acts 15, verses 20 and 29. And the law was laid down, "Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed," Genesis 9:6. The loss of life is the penalty for sin, and its typical vicarious surrender was necessary for remission, Hebrews 9:22. And so, under the Mosaic law, the blood of animals was used in all offerings for sin, and the blood of beasts killed on the hunt or slaughtered for food was poured out and covered with earth, because withheld by God from man's consumption and reserved for purposes of atonement, Leviticus 17, 10-14, Deuteronomy 12, 15 and 16. The blood of Jesus, the blood of Christ, the blood of Jesus Christ, or the blood of the Lamb, are figurative expressions for his atoning death, 1 Corinthians 10:16, Ephesians 2:13, Hebrews 9:14 and 10:19, 1 Peter 1:2 and 19, 1 John 1:7, Revelation 7:14 and 12:11. End quote. Since life is given by God and is to be lived on his terms alone, no life of man or beast can be taken except on God's terms, whether by the state, by man to eat, or by man in his self-defense. To attempt to govern or to take life apart from God's permission and apart from his service is like attempting to govern the world and the future apart from God. For this reason, Leviticus 19:26 puts the eating of blood, divination, and soothsaying all on the same level, as the same sin in essence. Deuteronomy 18:13 commands, Thou shalt be perfect, or upright, whole-hearted, majority text version, blameless, Berkeley version, with the Lord thy God. This is part of the often repeated commandment, Ye shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Exodus 19:6, Leviticus 11:44, 19:2, 20 verse 7 and 26, 1 Thessalonians 4:7, 1 Peter 1:15 through 16, etc. To be holy means literally to be separated, that is, set apart from a common to a sacred use. The utensils and vessels of the sanctuary, the ministers, and certain days were separated unto God's special service, and hence holy. Exodus 20 verse 8, 30 verse 31, 31, 10 through 11, Numbers 5:17, Zechariah 14:21. The defilement from lack of separation could be ceremonial and physical, Exodus 22:31, Leviticus 20 verse 26, or it could be spiritual and moral, Leviticus 20:6 through 7, 21 verse 6, 2 Corinthians 7:1, 1 Thessalonians 4:7. The holiness of God is his separation from all created beings as the uncreated and creating being, infinite in wisdom, power, justice, goodness, truth, and glory. The true holiness of man is man's separation unto God in faith and in obedience to God's law. The law is thus the specified way of holiness. Moloch worship seeks a non-theistic, a non-biblical way to holiness. It seeks to set itself apart as the power and the glory by means of sacrifices designed to transcend humanity. St. Paul specified some of these ways of false holiness as forbidding to marry and commanding to abstain from meats, which God hath created to be received with thanksgiving, for it is sanctified, made holy, by the word of God and prayer. 1 Timothy 4, 3 through 5. Very often societies have sacrificed men in order to dedicate and sanctify a building, to give it power. Writing in 1909, Lawson reported in his study of lingering paganism in Greece, quote, "It was reported from Zakynthos only a generation ago that a strong feeling still existed there in favor of sacrificing a Mohammedan or a Jew at the foundation of important bridges and other buildings. And there is a legend of a black man having been actually immured in the bridge of an aqueduct near Lebedea in Boeotia." End quote. Strack, in the course of disproving any special racial blood ritual among the Jews, did call attention to extensive evidences of superstitious human sacrifices and animal sacrifices in modern Europe. Man's attempts to control the world and to be the source of predestination lead also to false prophets. The law governing this declares, "If there arise among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, and giveth thee a sign or a wonder, and the sign or the wonder come to pass, whereof he spake unto thee, saying, Let us go after other gods, which thou hast not known, and let us serve them, thou shalt not hearken unto the words of that prophet, or that dreamer of dreams. For the Lord your God proveth you, to know whether ye love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. Ye shall walk after the Lord your God, and fear him, and keep his commandments, and obey his voice. And ye shall serve him, and cleave unto him." Deuteronomy 13, 1 through 4. "The Lord thy God will raise up unto thee a prophet from the midst of thee, of thy brethren like unto me. Unto him ye shall hearken. According to all that thou desirest of the Lord thy God in Horeb, in the day of the assembly, saying, Let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, neither let me see this great fire any more, that I die not. And the Lord said unto me, They have well spoken that which they have spoken. I will raise them up a prophet from among their brethren like unto thee, and will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak unto them all that I command him. And it shall come to pass, that whosoever will not hearken unto my words which he shall speak in my name, I will require it of him. But the prophet which shall presume to speak a word in my name which I have not commanded him to speak, or that shall speak in the name of other gods, even that prophet shall die. And if thou say in thine heart, How shall we know the word which the Lord hath not spoken? When a prophet speaketh in the name of the Lord, if the thing follow not, nor come to pass, that is the thing which the Lord hath not spoken. But the prophet hath spoken it presumptuously. Thou shalt not be afraid of him. Deuteronomy 18:15-22. Deuteronomy 13 cites 3 cases of instigation to idolatry. First, in verses 1-5, by the false prophet. Second, in verses 6-11, by a private individual. And third, by a city, verses 12-18. The penalty in every case is death without mercy. To the modern mind, this seems drastic. Why death for idolatry? If idolatry is unimportant to a man, then a penalty for it is outrageous. But modern man thinks nothing of death penalties for crimes against the state, or against the people, or against the revolution, because these things are important to him. The death penalty is not required here for private belief. It is for attempts to subvert others and to subvert the social order by enticing others to idolatry. Because for biblical law the foundation is the one true God, the central offense is therefore treason to that God by idolatry. Every law order has its concept of treason. No law order can permit an attack on its foundations without committing suicide. Those states which claim to abolish the death penalty still retain it on the whole for crimes against the state. The foundations of a law order must be protected. Criminal offenses always exact a penalty. The critical question in any society is this: who shall be penalized? Biblical law declares that restitution must prevail. If a man steals $100, he must restore the $100 plus another $100. The criminal is penalized. In certain crimes, his restitution is his own death. In modern humanistic society, the victim is penalized. There is no restitution, and there is increasingly lighter punishment of the criminal. Without restitution, crime becomes potentially profitable, and the victim is penalized by the state. The victim is penalized by the crime, by the court costs, and the prison costs as they appear in taxation. But crime always exacts a penalty above and beyond the individuals involved as victims and as criminals. The law order is breached. The peace and the health of society are broken. A society which tolerates penalties against itself and against its law-abiding citizens is a dangerous and a dying society. Basic to the health of a society is the integrity of its foundation. To allow tampering with its foundation is to allow its total subversion. Biblical law can no more permit the propagation of idolatry than Marxism can permit counter-revolution, or monarchy a move to execute the king, or a republic an attempt to destroy the republic and create a dictatorship. It should be noted that Deuteronomy 13:5-18 does not call for the death penalty for unbelief or for heresy. It condemns false prophets, verses 1-5, who seek to lead the people with signs and wonders into idolatry. It does condemn individuals who secretly try to start a movement into idolatry, verses 6-11. It does condemn cities which establish another religion and subvert the law order of the nation, verses 13-18. And this condemnation must be enforced by man to turn away the judgment of God, verse 17. This condemnation does not apply to a missionary situation where the land is anti-God to begin with. This is a situation for conversion. It does require a nation grounded in God's law system to preserve that order by punishing the basic treason against it. No society is without testing, and God tests man by these challenges to see whether man will stand in terms of God's order or not. Verse 3. Having dealt with false prophets, that is, false mediators, the law turns to the one true mediator. The Lord thy God will raise up unto thee a prophet from the midst of thee, of thy brethren, like unto me. Unto him ye shall hearken. Deuteronomy 18:15. This prophet and his work are described in verses 15 through 19. Men must either obey him, or else God will require it of men. Verse 19. Waller's comment concerning the prophet is especially good. Quote, "The connection between these verses and the preceding is well illustrated by Isaiah's question, chapter 8, verse 19. And when they shall say unto you, Seek unto them that have familiar spirits, and unto wizards that peep and that mutter, should not a people seek unto their God, for the living to the dead? Or, as the angel turned the phrase on Easter morning, Why seek ye him that liveth among the dead?" End quote. According to Calvin, quote, "The expression a prophet is used by analogy for a number of prophets. Not at all more correct is their opinion who apply it to Christ alone." End quote. Clearly, the passage does refer to prophets generally, and in verses 20 through 22, the false prophet is identified and called presumptuous. Thou shalt not be afraid of him. The term, however, equally clearly and more obviously applies to the one great prophet and mediator, as against the many false mediators. All prophets are speakers for the one prophet who speaks the word of the Lord. Since there is one true God, there is one word and one speaker. All prophets were speakers for the one prophet, Jesus Christ, the second person of the Trinity. The commandment is, Thou shalt have no other gods before me. In our polytheistic world, the many other gods are the many peoples, every man his own god. Every man under humanism is his own law and his own universe. Anarchism is the personal creed, and totalitarian statism the social creed, since only coercion can, in a polytheistic world, bring men together. Quote, "During the recent occupation of the Sorbonne, a student obliterated a large no smoking sign near the entrance to the auditorium and wrote, 'You have the right to smoke.' In due time, another student added, 'It is forbidden to forbid.' This slogan has caught on and is now appearing in many places which have been taken over by the students. In foot-high letters in the Grand Hall of the Sorbonne, someone has written, 'I take my desires for the truth, because I believe in the truth of my desires.'" End quote. These lawless students, while affirming that none had the right to forbid them anything, to coerce them into any behavior, were bent on coercing an entire nation. Total anarchy means total coercion. This is Moloch worship with a vengeance. All society must be sacrificed to satisfy these modern worshippers of destruction. The student revolution is a fitting climax to statist education. To surrender children to the state is to turn them over to the enemy. For the surrendered children, as the new Janissaries of the New Turks, to turn on the society which begat them and to destroy it, is a judgment on the Moloch worship of their elders. To have other gods and other laws, other schools and other hopes than the one true God is to invoke the whole weight of the law in judgment. Our culture today resembles the legend of Empedocles, the Greek philosopher. Quote, "Even in his lifetime, Empedocles was a charismatic figure. Diodorus describes him as laurel-wreathed, robed like a god in purple, sandaled in gold. He taught that the highest forms of human life, the closest to the divine, were the prophet and the physician. He was both. As a living myth, he attracted legend. Most spectacular of unsupported tales is the account of his death by suicidal leap into Etna's crater, self-immolation in the expectation of becoming, or at least being worshipped, as a god. The mountain, it is said, later gave back one golden sandal." End quote. Like the legendary Empedocles of old, our world today is seeking to make itself God by self-immolation.